At 10:42 p.m. on May 7, 1979, outside a beachfront social club in Brooklyn, Chris Rosenberg sat in the passenger seat of a stolen Cadillac and listened to Roy DeMeo explain why he had to die. Because of that, a 27-year-old cocaine dealer who had moved 40 kilograms a month through Canarsie and Bay Ridge learned that ambition without structure is just noise waiting to be silenced. Because of that, the most violent crew in Gambino family history showed the world what happens when you lie to Colombians, skim from your boss, and forget that loyalty is measured in blood, not profit. This is how a Jewish kid from Far Rockaway climbed into the machinery of organized crime, how he built a cocaine empire under Mafia protection, and how one impulsive decision turned him from earner to liability in less than 72 hours. Chris Rosenberg was born in 1950 in Far Rockaway, Queens, a stretch of salt-worn apartment blocks and narrow streets, where the Atlantic wind scraped paint off cars and ambition off most kids before they turned 20. His father ran a small auto body shop on Mott Avenue. His mother kept books for neighborhood stores. By age 14, Chris was stealing hubcaps and radios, selling them to chop shops in Jamaica, Queens, for $10 or $15 a set. By 16, he had dropped out of Far Rockaway High School and started running numbers for a bookie who operated out of a deli on Beach 20th Street. He was fast, he was hungry, and he understood the most important rule of the street: money moves faster than morals. In 1967, Chris met Roy DeMeo at a dice game in Canarsie. DeMeo was 27, a loan shark and car thief who worked under the Gambino family capo Anthony Gaggi. DeMeo had dark eyes, a soft voice, and a reputation for violence that kept debtors honest. He saw something in Rosenberg, a willingness to do the ugly work without flinching. Within a month, Chris was running stolen cars from Queens to New Jersey, forging Veng plates, and learning how to scrub a title clean enough to pass inspection. By 1968, he was a full-time member of the DeMeo crew, operating out of the Gemini Lounge, a two-story bar at 4021 Flatlands Avenue in Brooklyn. The Gemini was a narrow building with a red awning, a pool table in the back, an apartment upstairs where the crew conducted business that never made it onto paper. The bar served beer and whiskey to dock workers and truck drivers. The apartment upstairs had plastic tarps, a bathtub with a drain that could handle weight, and walls thick enough to muffle sound. It was here that DeMeo built the most efficient murder operation in Mafia history. Between 1973 and 1983, the DeMeo crew killed an estimated 75 to 200 people, though the exact number remains disputed because many bodies were never found. Chris Rosenberg was not the muscle. He was 5 feet 9 inches, 160 pounds, with curly brown hair and a fast mouth. He was the dealmaker, the one who could talk to civilians, shake hands with legitimate businessmen, and close a stolen car sale without raising suspicion. By 1970, he was moving 30 to 40 stolen luxury cars a month through a network of chop shops and dealerships in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The crew bought wrecked titles for $50 to $100, stamped the Veng numbers onto stolen vehicles, and sold them for $5,000 to $10,000 each. The profit margin was 80%. DeMeo kept 40%. Rosenberg kept 20%. The rest was split among the crew. In 1972, cocaine arrived in New York in quantities that changed the math. Colombian cartels, primarily the Medellin network run by Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers, began flooding the East Coast with powder that sold for $50,000 per kilogram, wholesale, and $100,000 retail. The Gambino family, under boss Carlo Gambino, had stayed away from narcotics for decades, following the old Sicilian rule that drugs brought heat and informants. But Carlo Gambino died in 1976, and his successor, Paul Castellano, was more businessman than boss. Castellano ran the family like a corporation, and cocaine was the fastest-growing sector in the market. Chris Rosenberg saw the opening. In 1977, he approached DeMeo with a proposal: use the stolen car network to launder cocaine profits and use Gambino muscle to protect shipments from Colombian suppliers. DeMeo brought the idea to Anthony Gaggi. Gaggi brought it to Castellano. Castellano said yes, with one condition: no direct family involvement. The Colombians were volatile, unpredictable, and expendable. If the deal went bad, the blame would fall on the crew, not the family. Because of that, Rosenberg became the Gambino family's primary cocaine broker in Brooklyn. He connected Colombian suppliers in Queens and the Bronx with Italian distributors in Bensonhurst, Gravesend, and Bay Ridge. He moved 20 to 40 kilograms a month, charging a 10% commission on every transaction. The Colombians liked him because he paid on time and never shorted weight. The Italians liked him because he kept the Colombians at arm's length and never brought heat to their neighborhoods. DeMeo liked him because he earned $100,000 to $150,000 a month without pulling a trigger. By 1978, Chris Rosenberg was driving a black Corvette, wearing tailored suits from a shop on Mulberry Street, and dating a 22-year-old model from Park Slope. He rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Ocean Parkway with a view of the water. He paid cash. He threw parties at the Gemini, where champagne and cocaine flowed until sunrise. He was 28 years old, a Jewish kid from far Rockaway who had climbed into the Gambino family without getting made, a feat that required protection, skill, and an understanding that he would never be more than a useful outsider. The rules were simple: pay DeMeo his cut, never skim, never lie, never bring Colombians to the Gemini, and if a deal went bad, eat the loss and move on. Rosenberg followed the first 3 rules. He broke the 4th in March 1979. It started with a shipment. A Colombian supplier named Andres Hernandez fronted Rosenberg 25 kilograms on credit, a standard arrangement worth $1.25 million wholesale. Rosenberg was supposed to move the cocaine through his network within 10 days and pay Hernandez $1.25 million plus a 5% fee. Instead, Rosenberg sold 15 kilograms and kept the money. He told Hernandez the remaining 10 kilograms had been seized by the NYPD during a traffic stop in Canarsie. He showed Hernandez a fake police report typed on stolen NYPD letterhead. Hernandez did not believe him. Because of that, Hernandez sent 2 men to the Gemini on April 3, 1979, to collect the debt. They walked into the bar at 9:15 p.m., asked for Rosenberg, and told the bartender they would wait. Roy Dio was upstairs. He heard the conversation through a vent in the floor. He came downstairs, walked to the table where the 2 men sat, and asked them to leave. One of the men stood and pulled a knife. DeMeo shot him twice in the chest with a .38 revolver. The second man ran for the door. Anthony Center, a crew member standing near the pool table, tackled him, dragged him to the back room, and stabbed him 14 times. Because of that, DeMeo had 2 dead Colombians in the Gemini, a narcotics debt tied to his crew, and a mess that could bring federal heat to the Gambino family. He called Gaggi. Gaggi called Castellano. Castellano said clean it up and find out who lied. DeMeo knew the answer before he finished the call. At 11:30 p.m. on April 3rd, DeMeo called Rosenberg and told him to come to the Gemini. Rosenberg arrived at midnight. DeMeo was waiting in the upstairs apartment with 3 crew members: Anthony Center, Joseph Testa, and Henry Borelli. Rosenberg walked into the room and saw plastic tarps on the floor. He turned toward the door. Center grabbed him. Testa put a .22 pistol to the back of his head and asked him one question: "Did you skim the Colombians?" Rosenberg said no. Testa pulled the trigger. The shot did not kill him, The .22 round entered the base of his skull, but missed the brainstem. Rosenberg fell, conscious, blood spreading across the plastic. He tried to crawl toward the stairs. Borelli kicked him in the ribs and flipped him onto his back. DeMeo knelt beside him, put the .38 revolver against his forehead, and fired twice. The autopsy report, filed May 10, 1979, by the Kings County Medical Examiner, listed 3 gunshot wounds to the head. Time of death estimated between midnight and 1 a.m. Cause of death, exsanguination, and cranial trauma. Because of that, the DeMeo crew dismembered Rosenberg's body in the upstairs bathtub, wrapped the pieces in garbage bags, and drove them to a landfill in Fountain Avenue, Brooklyn. The remains were never recovered. The NYPD opened a missing person case on May 9, 1979, after Rosenberg's girlfriend reported him missing. The case went cold within 6 weeks. But the story does not end with Rosenberg's death. It begins there. Because of that murder, the DeMeo crew attracted federal attention that eventually led to 19 indictments, 11 convictions, and the dismantling of the most violent criminal operation in Gambino family history. To understand why Rosenberg died, you have to understand who Roy DeMeo was and how the Gemini Lounge became a factory of death. Roy Albert DeMeo was born on September 7, 1940, in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, to Italian immigrant parents. His father was a loader at the Brooklyn docks. His mother cleaned offices in Manhattan. By age 18, Roy was running a loan sharking operation out of a candy store on 86th Street, lending money at 5% weekly interest, breaking fingers when payments were late. He was smart, methodical, and ruthless in a way that impressed the Gambino family capos who controlled Bath Beach and Bensonhurst. In 1966, DeMeo met Anthony Gaddi, a Gambino capo who ran rackets in Canarsie and East New York. Gaddi was connected to Carlo Gambino through marriage. His wife's uncle was a Gambino soldier. Gaddi saw potential in DeMeo and brought him into the family as an associate. By 1970, DeMeo was running a crew of 10 men out of the Gemini Lounge, specializing in car theft, loan sharking, and contract killings. DeMeo's innovation was efficiency. Before the Gemini crew, Mafia killings were messy, public, and left bodies that brought detectives and headlines. DeMeo turned murder into a process. The victim was lured to the Gemini under a pretense, usually a meeting about money or a deal. He was walked upstairs to the apartment. The moment he stepped through the door, a crew member standing behind the door shot him in the head with a .22 pistol equipped with a silencer. The small caliber round penetrated the skull, but lacked the velocity to exit, meaning no blood spray, no noise, no mess on the walls. The body was dragged to the bathtub. Another crew member, usually Joseph Testa, cut the throat to drain the blood. The process took 15 minutes. Once drained, the body was dismembered with knives and a saw, wrapped in plastic garbage bags, and loaded into a car trunk. The crew drove to one of several dumping sites: the Fountain Avenue landfill, the marshes near Gerritsen Beach, or the waters off Staten Island. The apartment was cleaned with bleach and ammonia. The tarps were burned. Within 2 hours, the Gemini was ready for business again. Between 1973 and 1979, the DeMeo crew killed an estimated 40 to 60 people using this method. The victims included debtors, informants, rival criminals, and anyone who became a liability. The NYPD knew the Gemini was a murder site, but without bodies, they could not build a case. The FBI opened an investigation in 1976, but DeMeo's crew was insular, loyal, and disciplined. No one talked. Chris Rosenberg was part of that loyalty until he broke it. His lie to the Colombians was not just theft. It was a threat to the crew's reputation, the Gambino family's business relationships, and DeMeo's standing with Paul Castellano. In the world DeMeo operated in, reputation was currency. A dealer who skimmed and lied was a dealer who could not be trusted. A dealer who could not be trusted was a dealer who brought federal attention. And federal attention was the one thing Paul Castellano would not tolerate. Because of that, Rosenberg's death was not personal. It was structural. DeMeo did not kill him out of anger. He killed him because the machine required it. But killing Rosenberg did not solve the problem. The two dead Colombians in the Gemini were connected to Andres Hernandez, who was connected to the Medellin cartel. Hernandez wanted his money or his product. DeMeo had neither. He had a missing dealer, a narcotics debt, and two bodies that tied his crew to a Colombian network that did not follow Mafia rules. On April 10, 1979, Hernandez sent a message through a mutual contact. Pay the $1.25 million, or the Colombians would start killing Gambino associates in Queens and Brooklyn. Paul Castellano received the message on April 12th. He called Anthony Gaggi and told him to settle the debt. Gaggi called DeMeo and told him to find the money or find the product. DeMeo had neither. Instead, he made a decision that would define the next 4 years of his life. On April 15, 1979, DeMeo and 3 crew members drove to a warehouse in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, where Hernandez stored cocaine shipments. They arrived at 2 a.m., cut the lock on the loading dock door, and walked inside. The warehouse held 50 kilograms of cocaine, stacked in bricks wrapped in brown paper and duct tape. DeMeo loaded the cocaine into 2 duffel bags and left. The theft took 11 minutes. Because of that, the Gambino family was now at war with the Colombians. Hernandez reported the theft to his supplier in Medellin. The supplier, a lieutenant in Pablo Escobar's network, sent word that the Gambino family had 30 days to return the cocaine or pay $2.5 million. If neither happened, Colombian hitmen would start targeting Gambino operations in New York. Castellano did not want a war. He was 64 years old, a businessman who preferred construction kickbacks and union rackets to street violence. He called a sit-down with Gaggi and DeMeo on April 20, 1979, at his mansion in Todd Hill, Staten Island. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Castellano told DeMeo to return the cocaine and pay the debt. DeMeo said he had already sold 30 kilograms and used the money to cover crew expenses. Castellano asked where the remaining 20 kilograms were. DeMeo said he did not know. Because of that, Castellano made a decision that ended Roy DeMeo's protection. He told Gaggi to isolate the crew, shut down the cocaine operation, and prepare to cut ties if federal heat arrived. Gaggi understood the message. DeMeo was now expendable. But DeMeo did not go quietly. Between April 1979 and January 1983, the DeMeo crew killed an estimated 30 more people, expanded into pornography distribution and weapons trafficking, and became the subject of three separate federal investigations. The cocaine theft brought attention from the Drug Enforcement Administration. The car theft operation brought attention from the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. And the murders brought attention from the NYPD's Homicide Division, which had linked the Gemini Lounge to 12 unsolved disappearances. In 1980, a crew member named Vito Arena was arrested on weapons charges in Queens. He was 32 years old, married, with 2 children. He faced 15 years in federal prison. The FBI offered him a deal: testify against DeMeo and serve 5 years. Arena refused. He was found dead in his cell on June 14, 1980, ruled a suicide by hanging. The NYPD suspected murder, but could not prove it. The message was clear. No one talked. In 1981, another crew member, Freddie DeNome, disappeared after being seen with DeMeo at the Gemini. His body was found 3 weeks later in the trunk of a car in Flatlands, Brooklyn. He had been shot 6 times. The NYPD believed DeNome had been skimming from car theft profits. DeMeo never confirmed or denied the killing. By 1982, the FBI had informants inside the Gambino family who reported that Paul Castellano wanted DeMeo dead. Castellano believed DeMeo's violence was bringing too much attention. The DeMeo crew had become a liability, and in the Mafia, liabilities are eliminated. On January 10, 1983, Roy DeMeo was found dead in the trunk of his Cadillac in the parking lot of a boat club in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. He had been shot 7 times in the head and chest. The medical examiner estimated time of death at 48 hours before discovery. The NYPD opened a homicide investigation, but made no arrests. The FBI believed the killing was authorized by Paul Castellano and carried out by Gambino soldiers, possibly including members of DeMeo's own crew. Because of that, the DeMeo crew collapsed. Anthony Gaggi was indicted in 1985 on racketeering charges and died in prison in 1988. Anthony Center and Joseph Testa were convicted of multiple murders in 1989 and sentenced to life in prison. Henry Borelli became a government witness in 1991 and testified against 14 Gambino associates. The Gemini Lounge was sold in 1984 and converted into a church. Chris Rosenberg's death was the trigger. His lie to the Colombians set off a chain reaction that exposed the DeMeo crew to federal investigators, destroyed Roy DeMeo's relationship with Paul Castellano, and ultimately led to the dismantling of the most violent crew in Gambino history. But the deeper lesson is about structure. Organized crime is not chaos. It is a system built on rules, enforced by violence, and maintained by loyalty. Rosenberg understood the system well enough to profit from it. He did not understand it well enough to survive it. He broke the rule that said never lie to your boss. He broke the rule that said never bring heat to the family. And he broke the rule that said reputation is more valuable than profit. Because of that, he died on a plastic tarp in a room above a bar where men played pool and drank beer and never asked what happened upstairs. The cocaine trade in 1970s New York was a gold rush without rules, a market where a kilogram bought for $10,000 in Bogota sold for $100,000 in Brooklyn, where supply lines ran through Miami and the profit margins justified every risk. The Colombians controlled the supply. The Italians controlled the distribution. And men like Chris Rosenberg controlled the space in between, the moment where money changed hands and trust was measured in milligrams. But trust is a currency that loses value the moment it is tested. Rosenberg tested it when he lied to Andres Hernandez. He tested it again when he told Roy DeMeo that cocaine had been seized. And he tested it a final time when he walked into the Gemini on the night of April 3, 1979, believing his words still had weight. The .22 round that entered the base of his skull weighed 40 grains. The .38 rounds that followed weighed 158 grains each. Together, they delivered a message that outlasted every deal Rosenberg ever made. In a system where loyalty is enforced by death, ambition without discipline is just noise. Roy DeMeo understood that. He built the Gemini crew on discipline, efficiency, and a willingness to kill without hesitation. He killed debtors who missed payments. He killed informants before they could talk. He killed rivals who encroached on his territory. And he killed Chris Rosenberg, his most profitable earner, because profit without loyalty is a threat. But DeMeo's discipline had a limit. He could control his crew. He could not control Paul Castellano's fear of federal attention. He could not control the DEA's focus on cocaine trafficking. And he could not control the fact that every murder, every stolen car, every kilogram of cocaine moved through the Gemini brought investigators one step closer. By 1982, the FBI had wiretaps on the Gemini Lounge. They had informants inside the Gambino family. They had testimony from witnesses who had seen DeMeo and his crew dispose of bodies. And they had a timeline that linked 37 unsolved murders to the Gemini over a 10-year period. The case was called Operation Gemini. The lead investigator was an FBI agent named Bruce Mao, who had spent 6 years building a racketeering case against the Gambino family. Mao's strategy was simple: flip a crew member, offer immunity, witness protection, and a new life in exchange for testimony. He approached 5 members of the DeMeo crew between 1980 and 1982. All 5 refused. 2 disappeared within weeks of being contacted. 1 died in a car accident ruled suspicious by the NYPD. The other 2 remained loyal until the crew collapsed. But loyalty has a breaking point. In 1982, Anthony Gaggi was indicted on loan sharking charges. Facing a 20-year sentence, he agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He provided testimony about the DeMeo crew's operations, including details about contract killings, cocaine trafficking, and the murder of Chris Rosenberg. His testimony was sealed under a protective order, but it gave the FBI the foundation they needed to move forward. On December 12, 1982, Paul Castellano received word that the FBI was preparing indictments against Roy DeMeo and several Gambino capos. Castellano called a meeting at his mansion in Staten Island. He told Gaggi that DeMeo had become a problem, that his violence was bringing too much heat, and that the family could not protect him anymore. Because of that, DeMeo was marked for death. The contract was issued in late December 1982. The hitters were Gambino soldiers from another crew, not DeMeo's men, to ensure the job was clean. On January 9, 1983, Roy DeMeo was lured to a meeting in Canarsie under the pretense of discussing a new car theft operation. He arrived at 10 p.m. He was shot 7 times and left in the trunk of his Cadillac. His body was discovered 48 hours later. Because of that, the DeMeo crew lost its leader, its structure, and its protection. Within 6 months, federal indictments came down on 11 crew members. Anthony Center and Joseph Testa were arrested in June 1983 and charged with 5 counts of murder. Henry Borelli was arrested in August 1983 and charged with racketeering. All 3 went to trial in 1989. Center and Testa were convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Borelli accepted a plea deal, testified against his co-defendants, and entered witness protection. The Gemini Lounge closed in 1984. The building was sold to a church group and converted into a community center. The upstairs apartment was gutted. The bathtub was removed. The walls were repainted. But the block on Flatlands Avenue still carries the memory. Locals still call it the Murder Club. Detectives still reference it when teaching recruits about organized crime. And the name Roy DeMeo still carries weight in Brooklyn, not as a symbol of power, but as a warning. Chris Rosenberg's name carries less weight. He was not made. He was not Sicilian. He was a Jewish kid from Far Rockaway who climbed high enough to see the machinery and stupid enough to believe he could manipulate it. He moved 40 kilograms a month. He earned $100,000 a month. He drove a Corvette and dated a model and threw parties where cocaine flowed until sunrise. And he died on a plastic tarp with a .22 round in his skull because he lied about 10 kilograms. The lesson is not about drugs. It is not about money. It is about the math of loyalty. In the Mafia, loyalty is not an emotion. It is a calculation. Every decision is weighed against the risk of exposure, the cost of heat, and the value of reputation. Chris Rosenberg understood the profit side of the equation. He did not understand the cost side until it was too late. Roy DeMeo understood both sides. He killed to protect the machine. He killed to enforce discipline. He killed because the system required it. But when he became the risk, when his violence brought more heat than his earnings justified, the calculation flipped. Paul Castellano weighed DeMeo's value against the FBI's pressure and decided the family was safer without him. Because of that, the Gemini crew ended not with a raid, not with a trial, but with a trunk and 7 bullets. The Mafia does not tolerate weakness. It does not forgive mistakes. And it does not hesitate to kill its own when survival requires it. The cocaine trade in New York did not end with Chris Rosenberg's death. It expanded. By 1985, the Colombians were moving 500 kilograms a month through Brooklyn alone. The Gambino family, under new leadership after Paul Castellano's murder in 1985, resumed cocaine trafficking with better discipline, better protection, and stricter rules. The D estimated that cocaine seizures in New York increased by 300% between 1983 and 1990, meaning the supply had increased even more. But the DeMeo crew's model, the system Roy built at the Gemini, died with him. No other crew replicated the efficiency, the discipline, or the brutality. The Gemini Lounge became a case study in federal law enforcement training, a model of how organized crime operates when violence is industrialized. Chris Rosenberg became a footnote, a name in a case file, a cautionary tale told in Brooklyn bars about a kid who climbed too fast and fell even faster. His body was never found. His family never got closure. His girlfriend moved to New Jersey and changed her name. And the only memorial to his life is the memory of the night he walked into the Gemini and learned that in a system built on blood, words mean nothing. Roy DeMeo's legacy is different. He is remembered not as a criminal, but as an architect. He built a system that killed 75 to 200 people over 10 years and left almost no evidence. He turned murder into a process, a repeatable method that maximized efficiency and minimized risk. Law enforcement still studies his methods. Criminal organizations still reference his techniques. And the Gemini Lounge still stands as a monument to what happens when violence is organized, disciplined, and unrelenting. But even architects die when the foundation cracks. DeMeo's foundation was loyalty. His crew was loyal. His boss was loyal, until the moment loyalty became a liability. Then Paul Castellano weighed the cost and made the call. And Roy DeMeo, the man who built the most efficient murder crew in Mafia history, died in the trunk of a Cadillac with 7 bullets in his body because the math no longer worked. Chris Rosenberg's math stopped working the moment he lied to the Colombians. He thought he could skim 10 kilograms and cover it with a fake police report. He thought his words would hold enough weight to override the missing product. He thought Roy DeMeo would protect him because he earned $100,000 a month. He was wrong on all 3 counts. The Colombians did not believe him. His words did not hold weight. And Roy DeMeo protected the system, not the man. Because of that, Chris Rosenberg, age 27, died on a plastic tarp in a room above a bar where men played pool and drank beer and never asked what happened upstairs. The autopsy report listed 3 gunshot wounds. The medical examiner estimated time of death between midnight and 1 a.m. on April 4, 1979. The remains were never recovered. The case was closed in 1980 as an unsolved disappearance. The NYPD moved on. The FBI moved on. The Gambino family moved on. But the lesson remains. In a system where loyalty is enforced by death, where profit is weighed against risk, where reputation is the only currency that matters, ambition without discipline is just noise. Chris Rosenberg made noise. Roy DeMeo silenced it. And the Gemini Lounge, a narrow bar on Flatlands Avenue in Brooklyn, became the place where the line between profit and death was drawn in blood, measured in kilograms, and enforced with a .22 round to the back of the head. That is how a Jewish kid from Far Rockaway climbed into the Gambino family. That is how he built a cocaine empire under Mafia protection. And that is how he died, not in a blaze of glory, not in a shootout with police, but quietly, efficiently, and permanently. because he forgot the one rule that kept everyone else alive. Never lie to the people who can kill you.